Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Martin Andrews, and I am so glad to welcome you today to our webinar, Teaching for Knowledge Transfer. Let me tell you really quickly about the sponsors of this webinar series, the hosts. The first one is the National Council for the Social Studies, and it is the largest professional organization in the country dedicated to social studies advocacy and building social studies knowledge across the country. And one way that you can participate in the world of social studies through NCSS is through their summer programs. And yes, we are already thinking about summer. And they have some great programs this summer, inquiring and teaching with primary sources, a summer virtual conference that's focused on elementary classrooms for those elementary teachers out there, Summer Leadership Institute, an Inquiry Design Model Institute. Check out all they have to offer in the summer. You can go to socialstudies.org/professional-learning, or just go to socialstudies.org and find your way there. These summer programs are highly impactful, and you're going to want to check them out. The webinar series is also brought to you by inquirED. inquirED has created Inquiry Journeys, our K-5 social studies curriculum to move instruction beyond the textbook. And guess what? You can actually get a free pilot for your school or district of Inquiry Journeys. If you scan that QR code, or if you go to inquirED.org, you can find out more about how you can experience the curriculum and then have the chance to really make an informed decision about how this curriculum can really shift instruction in your school or district. You're going to want to check that out. Right now, I would like to bring on Sarah Milo Hoskow, and I'm going to stop my share, and make it all big and full screen. Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm great, Martin. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're here. And one of the reasons why I asked you on to kind of serve as an MC on this webinar is because inquirED specifically has been talking and thinking a lot about knowledge building. And it might seem obvious to some or not to others, but why, Sarah?
Yeah, I think, when I hear this word knowledge, I'm hearing it everywhere. It's kind of like a hot word right now. And I'm hearing it in the literacy space. I'm hearing about how knowledge is so key to that comprehension strand of literacy. And then in social studies, actually, this is a discipline that knowledge has been a part of it for a long time. In some ways, almost knowledge heavy in the sense that it was like a teacher delivering knowledge to students. And the way we're talking about knowledge in social studies with the C3 framework is through this idea of a meaningful way to acquire and build knowledge that is authentic and that can make students are able to make meaning by applying that knowledge to the world around them. And I think these two conversations sometimes feel separate, but to me, they're two sides of the same coin. And when I think about my role at inquirED, I work with schools and districts and teachers in thinking about a knowledge-rich, inquiry-based social studies instruction. And I think it's always important when we're thinking about making big shifts in our instruction to not think of it as yet another thing, but to think of it as tied to the other things we're doing, the other things that we find really, really important and valuable. So this connection between what we know about knowledge and literacy and the way we're building knowledge in social studies, they're so deeply connected, and they need to be for our teachers and for our students.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I think it's really important too, like so often we're talking about the content that we teach in social studies, and then we might talk about our instructional moves, but today's panelist, who you're going to introduce in a minute, is thinking about what's happening in the brains of students. And I think that's such a great exploration. So right now, I'm going to head over to the chat, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Perfect. Well, I am really excited to welcome onto our webinar Mary Burkhauser, who has been thinking about what is going on in the brain as we build knowledge. And I think as educators, the more we can understand that, hi, Mary, the better we can do in serving our teachers and making really impactful learning experiences. So let me tell you a little bit about Mary. Mary studies how teachers experience and participate with literacy reform efforts. She is particularly interested in the relationship between teachers' implementation experiences with literacy reform efforts and the scalability of these reforms. Before coming to Harvard, Mary was a middle school English teacher in New York City and a research analyst at Child Trends. Mary earned her BA from Cornell University, her MST from Pace University, and her PhD from Harvard. So we can see that Mary's expertise and professional interest is so tied to our inquirED inquiry question of this webinar about how do students build knowledge and how that can help us have more impactful instruction for students. So Mary, I'm going to pass it to you and I'll keep an eye on the chat and take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. I was like, when do I turn on my camera? Oh, that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I put together a presentation for today, but I've told Sarah to please interrupt me if it feels appropriate to ask a specific question, and there should be time for more of a Q&A at the end as well. So it's amazing to be here, and I'm Mary, as Sarah said. I thought it was really funny when I was reading the little blurb that was sent out to everybody. It said celebrated researcher Mary Burkhauser, and I don't think of myself as a celebrity, but when I was putting together this presentation, I was like, oh, well, what information should I say at the beginning about myself? And it was helpful to think about biographies and the kinds of information that you typically find in a biography. So when you open up a biography, you can be pretty sure that you're gonna find information about what the person's childhood was like, what was his or her background, who were other important people in their life, why is she or he famous? So I use that structure as I put together a little bit about myself. And so as I'm giving my background, just kind of listen for some of those main ideas. So like Sarah said, I am a researcher at the Reeds Lab at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It sounds maybe more fabulous than it is. This is my street. This is where my office is. And I have been here since 2010 when I came to the ed school for my my graduate work. And I've stayed on in my research lab because I think the work we're doing is really important. I love the people. I mean, I think 14 years here, oh my goodness, that's a long time. And before that, I was a middle school teacher. Hello to middle school teachers here at MS223 in the South Bronx in New York City. This man here, Jimmy Kim, Professor Jimmy Kim, he is the head of the Reeds Lab. So all of the things I'm going to talk about today, he's really been instrumental in driving this work. And I feel so lucky to get to work with him, as well as I threw this picture on kind of last minute. My colleague, Anna, is on the call as well. She's a fellow learning designer here at the Reeds Lab. We've recently started kind of an Instagram. So then this is the picture Anna chose. So I thought this was appropriate to put up here. Outside of my work at Reeds Lab, I'm a mom. This is my daughter, Matilda. She's in first grade. And I love that she's in first grade because the work we do here, primarily, we're working with grades 1 through 4. And so I get to test out a lot of the curriculum that I design with Matilda. It's been a long time since I did a webinar, so I'm not famous for my webinars. This is actually an Instagram post I did from the last webinar, which was, I think was like 2017. You can see Matilda, the little baby in the background. I'm more famous for developing curriculum materials. We have a curriculum here called MORE, Model of Reading Engagement. You'll get to hear a little bit about that. And when I go out into schools and work with teachers, it tends to be smaller, more personal. We've been working a lot with a large urban district in the southeastern US. I also do some writing. Jimmy and I recently published a piece in Kappan that I recommend you check out if you find this presentation interesting and relevant for you. So that was a lot of information that I threw at you about me. I'm hoping that by giving you this structure at the beginning, some specific kinds of main ideas to listen for, that was helpful in parsing or organizing some of the details that I've thrown your way here. So I know I saw the poll, super interesting to see the breakdown of folks who are here. I'd love to know just a little bit more about you, why you're here, why this spoke to you, this webinar spoke to you. There are going to be some places in my presentation where you'll see that little chat icon, because I would like to gather some feedback from folks as I'm going along. Like I said, I'm typically in a much more sort of personal presentation with the audience and want to try to incorporate that as much as possible into this large webinar. I did see we had some North Carolina folks. I do a lot of work in North Carolina, so special hello to you all. Here at Reads Lab, our vision is we're here, we want to inspire all learners to love the written word and to find beauty, goodness, and truth in the natural and social worlds. And like I said, I've been here 14 years, and I think a big part of that is because I really believe in this vision. Like I really want to see this. These are the outcomes that I'm really interested in. Sometimes I hesitate to put that in front of the teachers that I'm working with, because they look at me kind of like Louisa's looking at Mirabella here in this still from Encanto. It's like talking about inspiration. I'm trying to hold up the world here. There's so much that I'm trying to manage in my classroom, in my school right now. And so when I see things in the schools that I'm working with, like a principal who tells teachers, hey, don't worry about science and social studies. You don't need to teach science and social studies, or I'm not going to give you space in the calendar, in the schedule for science and social studies. I want you to focus on math and ELA. When I see that happening, or when I see departmentalization happening in third grade, second grade, first grade, where teachers are specializing and you're splitting up math and science from ELA and social. Or when I see things like in classrooms, I've had science specialists say, oh, teachers they're showing the video, they're showing videos of experiments rather than doing the experiments themselves with kids. Or in social studies, I hear the specialists I work with saying, there's so much, they're having kids watch videos, they're telling kids all of this information, but the kids aren't having a lot of opportunities to connect with it, to discuss it with each other. When I see this happening in some of the classrooms that I work in, I get it. It's not that the principals, the teachers are trying to it's not that they don't believe in the power of science and social studies, but there's just so much. They're holding up so much, and they're trying to find ways to simplify. They're trying to find ways to keep things feeling deeper and simpler. Before I go on, I'm wondering, so this is some of my experience. I'm wondering if this resonates with your experiences in school systems. This departmentalization, specialization, or lots of presenting to students, but not as many opportunities for discussion. Situations where science and social studies are not really taught, or time is really cut back for science and social studies in favor of math and ELA. I'm curious if folks have similar experiences in the schools that they've been working in. And I'm just looking some at the chat. Yeah, I would say Montessori, so you're a lot of overlap in the younger grades, and then more departmentalized as folks get beyond. Yeah, time is limited. Time is always a challenge. And I get, you know, principals are trying to protect their teachers and keep them from feeling overwhelmed by everything that they are being asked to do. And so a question that we've been thinking a lot about is, how can we make the work that we're asking teachers and students to do feel deeper and simpler without compromising instructional quality? And we think that two key concepts that you need to understand in order to answer that question are schema and transfer. And so those are two concepts that I'm going to talk about today. So a schema is a noun. A schema is an intellectual framework for organizing knowledge. Some mental framework that we have in our heads. We're walking around with lots of schema, and it helps us to organize new information that we're getting. So when I introduced myself, I gave you all sorts of information about who I am, my background, what I do. I first introduced a kind of schema. So a schema for a biography, the kinds of main ideas that you would find in almost any biography that you open. And so genres are examples of kinds of schema that you see out there in the world. And when you read a biography, or we had a program where we sent kids books over the summer, including biographies, and we set them up to have that schema and to activate it so that when they got their book about a person, they knew, okay, I'm going to open this book. It's about a new person. I maybe don't know anything about this person, but I know the kinds of information that I'm going to find in this book, and that's going to help me to better understand it, to better comprehend it. This is just examples of different biographies and the kinds of information you find in them. And then we have this other concept, transfer. So this is a verb, and transfer is the ability to access and apply existing knowledge to make sense of new information that is maybe more or less related to the existing knowledge that we have. And I have these little icons that I put here with my key concepts. I think the one for transfer or for schema is pretty straightforward, but I'm wondering, why do you think I chose these two icons to go with transfer, the transfer concept? And I'm just gonna go ahead and chat in any ideas that you have. What do those icons have to do with transfer? And Sarah, if we're not getting a lot of chat, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you to think about it right here with me.
Well, I can just tell you what my brain started doing.
Yeah.
And maybe this is in line with it, but I started thinking about, well, what do I know about the human body? What do I know about a building? Oh, I'm starting to think about distance and scale. Then I went to or maybe where I think I'm comparing structures to other structures, and like bones versus like the steel in the building. So I don't know exactly why you chose these, but it got me thinking about the connections between two things I know. One thing I know maybe a little bit better, my body, and another thing that I'm less familiar with, which would be like architecture of a building.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's exactly kind of what I was going for when I put these two together. The scale is sort of weird. And maybe I'm like, oh, maybe in a revision, I would shrink that body down a little bit, but exactly. So we probably have a deeper understanding, more knowledge about our human body systems and how they work together to help us survive. Maybe less understanding, at least I do, about architectural systems, a skyscraper, how the different parts work together. But if we're able to transfer knowledge, we can use what we know about human body systems to think about the different systems that make a skyscraper work. it may be some folks on the call maybe know more about architectural structures than the specifics of the human body. So it can go either way. But the idea is, even though these things are not the same, we can compare them and use knowledge of one to more deeply understand, or at least know what questions to ask about the thing we know less about. So we'll come back to this. But what I want you to try right now, so I've just introduced two key concepts to you, schema and transfer. And I want you to think about how those concepts are connected. And I want you to write a sentence in the chat and include both of those concept words in your sentence. So just give that a try. And Sarah, I'm going to ask you, I love that you're here. Yes, do my bidding.
Right.
Yes, I'm going to ask you to just take a few seconds while folks are trying out this out for themselves and write down a sentence, and then I'm going to have you share it with all of us. Ooh, I'm loving these ideas here. As we engage in knowledge transfer, we enrich our existing schema of the world. It's easier to transfer knowledge if you're working with a shared schema. Schema provide a structure within which to make comparisons and allow for the transfer of knowledge. Yeah, this is great. Sarah, what did you come up with?
I'm definitely not going to do better than these, but I said we pull from our schema when learning new things, and that process is transfer.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to read a few more. These are so good. To facilitate a transfer of knowledge, we can share our schema with others to further deepen and complexify our understandings. Yeah, so these two things work together. We have all kinds of different schema already, and as we encounter new information, we can use our schema to try and understand the new information that we're learning. And that new information enriches our existing schema, complexifies our existing schema. And this is just an example from life where I found myself doing some of this work and trying to use knowledge transfer. My daughter asked me what a battery is. What's a battery? And I was sort of like, I sort of know, but I didn't know how to answer that question right away. So I think about what you would say. I'm not going to make you chat it, and some of you probably know a ton about batteries and could just like write a paragraph right now, explain it extremely well. I'm not one of those people. And so I started to think, okay, what are some schema that I have that could help me start to think about how to answer this question? And I really love the schema of a system. I find it useful in so many situations. So what do I know about a system? What do I know about systems? Well, I know a system. A system is something has multiple parts that move or work together to do something that no one part could do on its own. Okay, so that's my understanding of a system. Is a battery a system? Some questions I might ask, thinking about, is a battery a system? Does it have multiple parts? What are its parts? What are those parts working together to do or accomplish? And how do they work together? So then when I go to the internet and find a reliable site to try and understand enough about what a battery is to explain it to my 7-year-old, I have in my head those questions. Okay, a battery, I'm thinking it's a system. So I'm I found this article. There are a lot of different kinds of batteries, but they all function based on the same underlying concept. A battery is a device that is able to store electrical energy in the form of chemical energy. Aha. So what I'm getting here first is, what is the function of a battery? What does it do? What do all the parts do? Well, they store electrical energy. Okay. So a battery is something that stores electrical energy. So now I'm reading on, I'm going to think, okay, what are the parts here? I'm looking at the second paragraph. There are three main components of a battery. Two terminals made of different chemicals, the anode and the cathode, and the electrolyte. So I have the function of this system, and then I'm starting to get information about the parts. And as I read on, I'm going to be trying to pay attention to how do those parts move or work together to accomplish this thing that a battery does. And then when I present this information to my daughter, I'm going to make that, I'm going to tell her hey, it's a system. It has lots of parts, like blah, blah, and blah, and they move together to store electrical energy. So it's going to give me a structure to start to talk about how a battery, what it is and how it works. And I love system as a schema because it is so applicable in social studies, in science, in the content literacy curricula that I've seen. Systems are everywhere. They really are. And so if you're looking for a place to start, if you're like, I want to try this out. I want to start thinking about what are some of the schema that are that are across the curriculum or that are in ELA. And I want to make connections between ELA and social studies. I would recommend starting with systems and looking for systems.
Mary, can I ask a question here? And if you're going to get to this, just like punt the question till later, but what you just demonstrated to me was like, you were going to go read a text that's not so complex for you, you know, all the words and all of that, but the content is new for you.
Yeah.
And there was something metacognitive that happened where you said, for me to learn, I need to activate a schema. I'll call on my schema of systems. Is that, as a tool that learners use in their toolbox, something that needs to be taught? This idea of, to do this, I want to find a schema that is going to help me here.
Yes. So I think that as an adult, that I don't always say to myself, like, what is the schema, you know, that I'm activating here? As I'm reading this paragraph, though, when I see a word like three main components, when I see the word components, or when I see like branches, three branches of government, like there are these words that I see in text that like give me a clue, like, hey, we're talking about a system here. It has parts. Let's pay attention to those parts. But for students, it is important to make it more explicit for lots of reasons. For one, like I love to start out and just ask students. So if we're thinking about systems as a schema, like what are some systems that you know a lot about? And it's kind of cool because like students will bring in all kinds of knowledge of systems that I don't have a lot of knowledge about. Cars, batteries. And so you like lift up that, hey, actually in this room, we already know a ton about systems and how they work. And now we're going to talk about a different kind of system. We're going to talk about a social system. And as we learn about our local government, we're going to learn about what it does that no part could do on its own, and what those different parts are and how they move together. Just like all these parts of a car battery move or work together. And with any system, we can ask, what would happen if this part disappeared? What would happen if our bones disappeared, or if this part broke? And then in a government system, what would happen if this part stopped working for whatever reason? how would it function? What would the consequences be? And so I think when you highlight at the beginning the schema that you kind of want kids to use or to help them think about it, when you do that at the beginning, you're showing students, hey, you actually already know a lot about this.
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot to bring to this, even though you may not have studied this particular topic. You're already coming in with a lot. And I think that's, yeah, that's important.
What I love about what you're saying, and I was trying to find the comment in the chat, someone said, each of us has a unique schema. So some kids might have more prior knowledge about batteries. But what you're saying here is when we build on a schema like systems or something like that, we all have it. If we know that a system is parts that move and work together to accomplish something greater than they can do alone, well, we all know about systems. So it is this amazing equalizer for having access to content.
Yes, absolutely. And by making that more clear at the beginning and by helping students connect, this new kind of system that I don't know a lot about with these systems that I do know something about, it helps them retain that information. And so that, they not only do they pass the test at the end of the unit, but then they have that richer understanding of different kinds of systems as they go into the next unit, as they go into the next year, encounter texts in the newspaper or what have you. You're building those robust schema like somebody was talking about in the chat.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I will stop interrupting because you have so much more.
No. I think this is really good. This is really good. So please keep interrupting.
Okay.
Yes. So the next little section, I was going to do a read aloud, and this gets into some of the research work that we've done around schemas. So this is a read aloud that we wrote for a professional development we did over the summer. So it's called More Schemas, Please. Our intervention is called More, which we made it and they were like, I don't know if this is a good name because people don't really want to do more, but then like there are lots of punny ways that you can use it and so we just ran with it. So as I'm reading, we've talked a lot about schema, but as I'm reading, listen for more information about what schemas are. You don't need to put up a silent finger every time you learn something new. But feel free to highlight something in the chat. Okay, so 7 years ago, a partnership was born between Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools and Jimmy Kim, professor of education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and head of Reed's Lab. Their mission, to improve academic outcomes for all CMS students. Jimmy and his team pored over decades of existing research. They pored over different curricula. One thing they noticed, so many curricula use high-quality texts that are rich with vocabulary, but oftentimes students are just exposed to lots of information without a way to organize, retrieve, and apply it. The research team decided to build their units around schemas. But what are schemas exactly? And I'll just stop for a second because another thing that hit me when I was reading that article about batteries was some of the vocabulary words like anode, cathode, like these are words that I have seen before. But like if you had asked me last week before I read up a little bit on batteries, like I would not have been able to say really anything about those words. But now that I've started to build this like little schema in my head, I'm like, oh, that's a part of a battery. I don't know yet exactly what it does, but it's one of those three main components of a battery. So a lot of times we have all this information in all these vocabulary words that are, bolded and put in alphabetical order as part of our units. But we're missing an explicit way to help students organize, retrieve, and apply that knowledge. Okay, so what are schemas? And this is another way we use different metaphors. Sometimes it's helpful to have multiple metaphors to really understand the concept. So a schema, you could also think of it like a tree trunk with branches coming off the trunk and leaves covering the branches. If there's no tree trunk, there's no place to hang the branches and leaves. You just have a bunch of disembodied tree parts. So again, if you think about systems and the systems is like the tree trunk. And like literally have looked at some of the North Carolina science standards, the word system appears like 17 times. Like it's everywhere, but we don't necessarily highlight that for kids. So they learn about the solar system and they learn about plant systems and human body systems, and they're everywhere. But for students and for teachers too, I think sometimes it's like you feel like, oh my God, there's so many standards, there's so much. And it doesn't have to, if we organize it around schema, it maybe doesn't have to feel so overwhelming. It doesn't have to feel like a basket of disconnected facts. Students need to hang their knowledge on a schema to make it easier to acquire, connect, and apply knowledge to new concepts. We can think of schemas as supportive intellectual structures on which we hang our knowledge. They are the glue linking different concepts to an overarching topic. So I'm just going to skip ahead just a little bit. And because I want to tell you a little bit about some of this, a different schema and some of the work that we did. So Jimmy selected vocabulary words rich in content related to a science schema. As students acquired word meanings, they could hang those concepts onto the developing schemas. So for example, we had a topic, animal survival. So this is another schema that you see everywhere. And so we're working with first graders, and we chose vocabulary words like survive, adapt, habitat, advantage, extinct, physical characteristic, and behavior. We had books about different animals and how they survive. And this image at the bottom of this page here, this is a tool that we use called a concept map. Some of you may be familiar with this tool. And you can see how all of the words that we taught, we've connected them on the concept map. It also has images. You'll see definitions on some concept maps as well. So basically, a concept map is like a physical embodiment of some of the networking of vocabulary words that you hope is developing in students' brains as they're going through the unit. So we called this program that we created Model of Reading Engagement More. We've done various experiments on it with schools in Charlotte. And we found in our first study that students who participated in this intervention scored higher on the MAP assessment than those who did not. But we wanted to see if we were able to get even bigger, more exciting effects if we continued the development of this specific schema a second year as students were when students were in second grade. So we designed a second grade unit on how paleontologists study dinosaur fossils. And again, teachers created a concept map with their classes, included concepts like paleontologist, fossil, brutal, theory. They referenced this map during discussions, read-alouds, and writing tasks. And we also gave students the opportunity in second grade to revisit some of those, so their first grade schema and some of the concepts they'd learned the year before. We call this sort of curriculum a spiral curriculum that builds on the previous year's content. Let's see. So we wanted to know, is this spiral curriculum, is it helping students transfer knowledge? So we had them at the end, we had students read 2 passages. So we had them read a passage on how paleontologists study sea ammonites. And we also had them read a passage on how archaeologists study the ancient city of Pompeii. What do these 2 topics have in common? What is their overarching schema? So although you might say, well, topic 1 is more, learning about dinosaurs, that's more of a science kind of topic. And we're talking about archaeologists in ancient cities, maybe that's more of like social studies, or the lines get really blurry here. But they share a common schema. They're both about scientists trying to study things from the past. And we didn't explicitly teach students about archaeologists, about the work that they do, but students were able to leverage their knowledge, their schema about paleontologists, and make those connections as they were reading about a topic that was removed from the thing that they had been taught. So I'm going to stop there, I think. And because Sarah, I want to make sure to get to some of the strategies that folks might use if they're interested in starting to do this sort of work with their own students or with the teachers that they're working with.
Absolutely. We love strategies. We love to leave with something applicable, but this is really interesting. So you're finding in this case, you're looking at like schemas a level removed and a level removed. And I also think I want to call out, oftentimes when I hear about a spiraling curriculum, is the idea of, I remember as a teacher, it was like, oh, we're going to teach double-digit multiplication at this point of the year, and then we're going to make sure we spiral back to practicing double-digit multiplication at another point in the year so kids don't forget. But you're using spiral in a different way. You're using spiral really like that's doubling back kind of. You're really using spiral as the student's knowledge is getting broader and wider and going out as you're coming back to related concepts, not just the same information, which I think is really a great, it's a great thing to call out as a differentiator of the way you're using spiral.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you pointed that out. And I think, when we're doing this kind of analogical thinking and we're maybe using what we know about the human body to think about skyscrapers, there are ways that it's a bit simplistic, right? It's a model. Like there are lots of ways that human systems and skyscrapers are different. And part of a spiral curriculum is also noticing the ways that paleontologists and archaeologists are also like their work is really different as well. And so things that, are maybe not oversimplified, like if you're working with kindergarten and first grade, but they are necessarily at a simpler level. But then you can get more like complex and just like a little messier too as you go up the grades.
Fantastic. And while you're digging into these strategies, I do want to call out one question I saw in the chat.
Please.
And it was the question of like, it was back when we were talking about systems as a schema. And someone said, but don't we have to teach systems first for this to work? And this is something I actually hear all the time as I'm supporting schools and districts and teachers with using our social studies curriculum is, but what about the prior knowledge? So in this case, this idea of being able to like even know the word system feels like that same question of like the prior knowledge to even tap into this schema. So if there's anything on that as maybe you want to just respond to that, or if you can like tie it to some of these strategies, that might be helpful.
Yeah, so I think that I think you might be surprised at how much kids already know coming in about these schema. They won't know the word schema necessarily, right? They may not even know the word system, but they know what it's like to be maybe part of a family or part of a class. Like this classroom, guys, we're a system. Let me tell you how we're a system. So yes, like you may have to give the kids the label of a system, and then it has parts. You give them the definition, but they already have these examples in their experiences. And when you already have the experiences, it's pretty easy to then get the label for what it's called.
Got it. That's super helpful.
Yeah.
Knowledge we have to the label we want, and then build on that schema.
Exactly. Yeah. The other schema that we work a lot with is animal survival. And that's another one that just like shows up everywhere and is relevant to both science and social studies. And one that like kids walk in with a lot of knowledge about how they survive, the pets that they have in their house, and the things that their pets need to survive. And they may not, know that a bacteria is a kind of organism too, or a virus is like maybe a living thing, maybe not. Like there are these really complex ways of thinking about it, but they have the beginning of this schema for how organisms survive. And giving them those labels early is important, and then continuing to circle back and complexify it as they go.
And believing in what our students are already bringing into the classroom.
Absolutely. Yep. 100%. That is so important.
Okay, let's get into some of your strategies.
Well, so and this, I didn't have this on here, but one thing I love to do at the beginning of a unit is to, I don't know, what's a unit from your series?
Let's see. We have a unit on innovation, where students are looking at innovation over time and how innovators have changed the world and what does it take to be innovative and all of that. That's a second.
So, okay. I might at the beginning say, I want you to think about the word inventor. I'm just going to write that word up here. What words or phrases come into your mind when you hear me say the word inventor? Take a second, like write down your idea, or just think about your idea. Don't say it. Hold your finger up when you got an idea. I'm going to call on everybody one at a time real quick. We're going to go around. We call it a domino share. I want you to tell me what words or phrases came in your head, and then you write them down on the board. So things kids might say, they might name inventions. They might name inventors. They might, who knows, but it gives you a sense of like the background knowledge that's in the room, potential misconceptions that are in the room. But I mean, they might name inventors. This happens with dinosaurs when I do it. Like they may name inventors or dinosaurs that you've never heard of. And then it gives you sort of like a snapshot. You can organize it into categories and gives you a snapshot of the knowledge in the room. And I love, like, write it down, because then you can go back to it later and you can add on to it, or you can erase things or like move them around. But some sort of activity that gives kids a chance to share some of the ideas or knowledge that they already have.
And you're talking about literally building the schema. Literally, you're making it visual. You're putting it on the board and you're going to move it and change it as you learn, which I think ties to some of the best practices we know to reach all of our learners. So my schema is going here when you're talking about like, oh, things I know about culturally responsive education. You used a story here to help me make sense of this. Things I know about reaching diverse learners. It's just like, I'm seeing my schema going as you're talking about schema, which I love.
Yay. So just to share a few more ideas for things you might try as you're starting to, do this work. I mentioned concept mapping. Concept mapping is something we use in our units. A lot of times when I'm looking at district created materials or like stuff I used to do, like you have a page where you have all the vocabulary words that kids, are going to learn across the unit. And this information that you see here, this is organized. It's organized alphabetically. But that is not the way our brain organizes information for long-term storage and use. So one thing that you might do is just for your unit, take your list of vocabulary words and cut them up and move them around. So, using this concept map as an example, how would you connect the different words? Are some of the words actually like a label for a category of things, and other words are examples of things that fall into that category? And maybe as you're doing this, you realize, there are some other important words that need to be up here in order for kids to make these connections. And maybe those are words that I want to make sure and call out as well. It's sort of fun that doing this with teachers because they'll make their map and they start to, build this with kids, and the kids have different ideas about where words should go and why. And teachers always ask, they're like, can you tell me what the final product should look like? Like, what is the world's most perfect concept map for this unit? And I'm like, it could look lots of different ways. There isn't, one perfect way that it could look. And even if you don't end up like building a concept map with students in the beginning, I think the act of trying to create a concept map from your list of words, like that's going to help you start to think about the connections that are important here and the way that these and some of the larger schema that this is maybe part of.
And you're making me think of an activity that we have in our curriculum called Concept Connections. And it's a way for students to move around and do this, where they each get a vocabulary card and they're moving to another student with another card to see how those words are connected. So maybe in our follow-up blog about this, we can share that activity as an example of something that could be a way to take that concept map and make it kinesthetic as well.
I love that idea. It can also be a way for, like, we'll say, student kids, if you see an example of this out in the world, like bring it in, let's add it to our concept map. It doesn't have to be an article. It could be, a living or once living thing that you found on the sidewalk. Like bring it in, we'll tape it up to the wall.
I also love, we often have teachers talk about like the need for images on vocabulary cards.
Yes.
And like kids can be bringing in those images, finding them in magazines, they're finding the image that relates to the meaning of that word for them, as opposed to us choosing this one icon that would be the relevant image. So you're getting my brain firing for sure.
No, I love that. I love like making kids do the work. Another thing that I've done in the past would be, in social studies, there's all this cool art that, connected to the social studies content, and find a cool like piece of art that's sort of related, and like you don't have to think too much about it. You're like, I think this is kind of related. And I used to call it resource of the day. And you put this image up and then ask kids like in your group, where would you hang this image on our concept map and why? And see what they say, what the different groups ideas the different groups come up with. And you may be surprised at like the plethora of ideas that you get, and you're also exposing them to some cool art, some different things they might not have seen. I know we're just right on time. I keep clicking in and out because I'm like trying to look at the time. I think the last thing I would say would be, go on a standard scavenger hunt. So get out all of your state social studies standards and what words appear again and again and again and again and again. And those are going to be clues as to some of the larger schema that are at play in the different units. So often I see folks feel like, okay, we need to teach all of the standards about economics, and then we need to teach all of the standards about geography. But it doesn't have to be that way. And you'll see these schema come up, like something in econ is connected to something in the behavioral sciences, and can help you see the connections across all these many standards you're responsible for.
I love that strategy. I love the idea of making sense of so much and finding ways to consolidate it and make it more. You said that. You said we want to figure out how to make so much feel more manageable.
Yes. Yep.
Mary, this has been incredible. We are at time here. So I just want to thank you. I love going from what's happening in the brain, the scientific piece of it, and then thinking about how we can apply it to our classrooms. As Mark said, we will be following up with everyone with a summary of this, the recording, and some of those resources that we can share.
Yeah.
I could stay on forever with you, Mary. I am just loving this, but I want to thank you for taking the hour with us because we got so much out of it.
Yes. Yeah. No, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, if we're follow us on Instagram, find us on our website. We'd love to connect with teachers.
We can share that as well as we share out.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Mary. And thank you to everyone who's with us in the lively chat. We appreciate being with you all.